The desert world had always lived beneath the weight of law, not the kind written on parchment or codified in courts, but the kind etched into bone and blood by generations that refused to change. Justice here was not about fairness, but about preservation, about showing every man, woman, and child what happened when one dared to step outside the lines carved by the ancestors. Tradition did not bend. It crushed. The accused stood in the dust, her wrists bound, her face calm in the way only the condemned could be calm. She was young, scarcely into adulthood by her people's reckoning, but old enough to understand what awaited her. The Council of Elders had spoken the word, and once the word was spoken, no plea could unravel it. To violate a sacred taboo was to spit on the bones of forefathers, and the price for such defiance was blood spilled beneath stones. Around her, the crowd thickened. Children perched on shoulders, eyes wide with anticipation. Merchants closed their stalls early, drawn by the pull of spectacle. Warriors, decorated with paint and bone charms, took positions at the circle's edge. The stoning was not a private affair. It was theater, a reminder that law was absolute, and anyone, no matter how small, could be crushed to keep order intact. She had not wept. That was what unsettled them. When the charge was read, tending to forbidden fire, crossing into sacred ground, or perhaps something less concrete but more dangerous, like speaking aloud questions not meant to be spoken, she had only bowed her head. When the sentence was announced, she did not beg. It was not courage they saw, but resignation, a quiet refusal to gift them the tears they craved. Among the watchers was an outsider, a human mercenary, hired by chance and coined to escort caravans through the shifting wastes. To him, law here was strange and primitive, but he had learned long ago not to interfere in the customs of other worlds. His job was simple: stand guard, keep thieves away, earn pay, move on. But as the chants rose, as rocks were gathered in eager hands, he felt unease stir like sand beneath his boots. He had seen executions before. Soldiers cut down, thieves hanged, traitors shot. But never this. Never a ritual designed not just to kill, but to grind dignity into dust under the weight of tradition. There was no swiftness in this death, no finality delivered with steel or flame. It was slow, deliberate, drawn out so the crowd could savor each fracture of bone, each gasp of breath. The elders stood robed in colors of authority, their voices booming with judgment. They spoke of the need for purity, the cleansing of dishonor, the satisfaction of ancestors who demanded obedience. The people cheered, some with fervor, others with the hollow echo of habit. This was how it had always been. This was how it must be. The accused woman lifted her gaze once, scanning the sea of faces. Not a plea, not a challenge, just a look, tired and lonely. She found no allies among her own people. Each face was turned against her, eager for the ritual to begin, eager to reinforce the lie that tradition was strength. She lowered her head again, her fate sealed. The human shifted his weight, feeling the weight of silence inside himself. He should have walked away. He should have hardened his heart, as every mercenary learned to do. But something about the moment crawled under his skin. Perhaps it was the way no one questioned the justice of it. Perhaps it was the emptiness in her eyes, the knowledge that no one, not even her kin, would stand for her. Or perhaps it was simply that humans were cursed with a flaw other species lacked, the inability to watch cruelty and keep still. The circle was drawn in the dust. Stones piled in baskets at its edge, each one chosen for weight and sharpness. The first was handed to a warrior, honored for the opening throw. He raised it high, basking in the roar of approval, ready to cast the judgment of his people into her flesh. The human's jaw tightened. He told himself again that this was not his fight, not his people, not his law. But the words rang hollow. He had always believed law meant protection, meant justice, meant shielding the weak from the cruelty of the strong. This was no law. This was theater of blood masquerading as order. As the first stone hovered above the crowd, the human felt the heat of decision burning inside him. He did not yet know what he would do, only that standing idle was no longer possible. He had crossed too many battlefields, carried too many scars, to pretend that looking away absolved him of guilt. He had learned one truth in war. Silence was the ally of cruelty. The stone arced down. The moment of choice arrived. And the human's fists clenched, his boots shifted forward, and the breath of the crowd thickened in his ears like a storm about to break. The stone struck with a sickening crack, but not against the condemned. Dust billowed as a figure moved into the circle, intercepting the blow with flesh instead of bone. Gasps cut through the roar of the crowd. The human stood over her, arms spread, back bent, shielding her body with his own. Blood ran in a line down his shoulder where the first rock had torn skin, and for a moment the crowd faltered, caught between confusion and outrage. The warrior who had cast the stone shouted, demanding the ritual resume. Elders barked commands, declaring no law allowed interference, especially from an outsider. But the human did not move. He knelt low, using his body as a shield, his voice low and steady, telling her to stay down. She tried to push him away, whispering that it was not his fight, that he would be killed for nothing. He ignored her, teeth clenched, eyes fixed on the storm he had chosen to endure. The next stone came, sharper and heavier, smashing against his ribs. He grunted, but did not fall. Another struck his temple, sending sparks across his vision, yet he pressed tighter against her. Soon the air filled with flying stones, each impact ringing through his body, each strike carving fresh wounds. Bones cracked beneath the onslaught, skin split open, muscles screamed with fire, but he endured, his frame unyielding even as it buckled. The crowd's shouts shifted from laughter to unease. Never had anyone stepped into the circle. The law had no words for substitution.
To them, it was madness.
Yet madness that refused to collapse held a strange power. The alien woman beneath him trembled, not from fear of death, but from disbelief. She had accepted her fate long before, but no one had ever chosen to suffer for her. She whispered again, pleading for him to stop, but his only answer was silence and the weight of his body refusing to yield. Blood spattered the sand. His breaths grew shallow, yet every time the crowd thought he would fall, he steadied himself again. The warriors hurled stones with more force, determined to break him, but his defiance only grew heavier. The people began to argue among themselves. Some shouted for his death. Others questioned whether this was still justice. The elders exchanged sharp words, uncertain whether to call an end or double the punishment. Their authority, once unquestioned, now trembled under the sight of one man absorbing their violence, without faltering. One stone split his brow, blood streaming into his eyes. He blinked through the blur, his vision a haze of red and dust. Another blow smashed into his arm, fracturing bone, but he pulled the broken limb tighter around her as if daring the world to pry her free. Pain roared through his body, but behind it burned a single truth: she would live. He had chosen that, and no storm of stones would tear the choice from him. The jeers of the crowd softened into murmurs. Children who had once laughed at blood now clutched their parents, whispering questions that had no easy answers. Why would a stranger bleed, for one not his own? Why would he choose agony over silence? Adults avoided each other's eyes. The spectacle that was meant to teach obedience had twisted into something they did not understand. Every strike made the human less a man and more a symbol. His flesh became canvas for defiance, his endurance a mirror reflecting their cruelty back upon them. Some spat in disgust, claiming it was weakness to shield another. But others saw strength they could not deny, strength that did not come from domination but from sacrifice. The alien woman pressed her hands against his back, feeling the shudder of each impact, her heart breaking with each ragged breath he took. She whispered words of apology, words of gratitude, words he would not let her speak aloud. He had made his choice, and he would not release it. Stone after stone, until the dust clouded the air and the circle reeked of blood. His body swayed like a tree battered by storm, cracking but unbroken. He did not strike back. He did not curse. He endured. And endurance, in that moment, became more terrifying than any blade or fire. The elders tried to rally the crowd, commanding the punishment continue until both lay lifeless. Yet their voices lacked conviction. They had never imagined such defiance, never accounted for the possibility that one being might twist their ritual into something sacred. By clinging to law, they had exposed its hollowness. The human's breaths rattled, his chest rising in ragged defiance. The woman beneath him closed her eyes, unable to watch his ruin, yet unwilling to abandon his shield. Every stone hurled became a question that echoed in the minds of those watching. Was this justice, or was it cruelty stripped bare? Minutes dragged into eternity. Arms grew tired from throwing, voices hoarse from shouting. Still he remained, bleeding into the sand, his body refusing collapse. And when silence finally fell, it was not commanded but born of exhaustion, born of awe, born of fear that to strike again would be to admit weakness before one who had redefined strength. There, in the circle meant to end her life, the human knelt broken but unyielding, his shadow cast long over her trembling form. He had entered with nothing, no weapons, no allies, no place among them. Yet with only his body and will, he had unraveled the ritual meant to uphold their world. The crowd no longer roared. They whispered. They questioned. And beneath his bloodied frame, the condemned woman breathed, alive, shielded by a defiance none of them could match. The storm ended not with command, but with silence. Stones slipped from tired hands, voices cracked and faltered, and in the circle lay a figure that should not have still been breathing. The human sagged forward, body drenched in blood, every breath rattling like a knife drawn against bone. His arms, broken and trembling, still shielded the woman beneath him. The sand around them was soaked red, a grotesque altar built not by intention but by endurance. The crowd stared. Their fury had withered into something colder, a weight pressing against their throats. No one had prepared for this outcome. The ritual was supposed to end in death, not in survival. Yet here was a man who had taken what was meant for another and lived through it. His refusal to collapse turned cruelty into question, tradition into shame. The woman shifted beneath him, lifting his ruined frame with hands too small to bear the weight. Her face, once passive, now burned with something fierce. She whispered his name, though she barely knew it, and begged him to stay awake. He answered with a groan, his lips split and torn, but even through the haze of pain his eyes met hers. He had not come for glory. He had not come for reward. He had come only so she could rise again. The elders argued in harsh tones, their voices carrying panic. Some demanded the ritual resume until both lay dead, claiming law must not be broken. Others warned that the act itself had changed the ritual. Killing him now would not restore authority. It would prove weakness. The council, once united in its certainty, fractured under the weight of one broken outsider. Children pulled at their parents, asking why he had done it. Why would someone bleed for another? Why would he stand against everyone for one life, not his own? No answer came. Mothers hushed them. Fathers scowled at the ground, but none dared meet each other's eyes. The certainty of tradition had cracked, and the question lingered heavier than any stone. The woman wrapped her arms around him, straining to lift. He tried to push himself up, legs buckling, blood dripping from wounds too deep to count. He managed only a few steps before collapsing again, but she refused to leave him in the dust. If he had given his body to keep her alive, then she would give her strength to keep him standing. Together, broken and stumbling, they became a sight no one in the circle could look away from. Warriors, still clutching stones, hesitated. They had been raised to see mercy as weakness, obedience as strength. But the man had shown a power they had never imagined. He had taken every strike, every cut, every bone-snapping blow, and turned it into proof of will. His suffering was not weakness. It was endurance beyond their understanding. Some lowered their stones, unsure if casting another would prove loyalty or expose cowardice. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some claimed he was cursed, protected by spirits that mocked their law. Others swore he was chosen, sent by gods to reveal a truth they had forgotten. None could deny what they had seen, a creature of flesh and blood, no different than themselves, standing unbroken where none of them would have dared. The woman's survival had become more than defiance of judgment. She was now a vessel of memory, bound to the sight of a man bleeding so she could walk again. Every glance at her face would remind them of this day. Every word she spoke would carry the echo of stones that failed to kill. The elders tried to speak, to reclaim authority, but their voices faltered. Their power had rested on fear, on unquestioned obedience. Yet here was one who feared nothing, who obeyed no law but his own. His silence spoke louder than their decrees. His broken frame carried more authority than their robes. Some in the crowd began to kneel, not to him, but to what he represented. They knelt to endurance, to sacrifice, to a truth buried too long under the weight of tradition. Others turned away, ashamed to face what they had done, ashamed to admit that one man's suffering had unraveled their certainty. The human sagged again, barely conscious, his breath shallow and ragged. But even as he fell, his arms never loosened from the woman. She cried into his chest, her voice breaking, not for herself, but for him. She had been ready to die, yet he had forced her to live. And now she carried the unbearable knowledge that her life had been bought with his pain. The circle that was once a stage for death had become a mirror reflecting the weakness of cruelty. The people who had come to see bloodshed now stood in silence, forced to confront the truth that the outsider had carved into the sand with every drop of blood. Their law had not broken him. Their stones had not bent him. Their tradition had not silenced him. He had chosen suffering, and in that choice had shown them strength they could not claim. The silence weighed heavier than the stones ever had. It pressed into their minds, into their hearts, a seed that would grow long after the dust had settled. The woman looked to the crowd, her voice trembling but clear. She did not thank them, did not curse them. She only said that their law had sought her death, and one not of their kind had given his life to deny it. Her words struck sharper than any stone, and none dared answer. The human collapsed at last, his body beyond its limits, his spirit still burning behind fading eyes. And though he fell, his act remained standing. The people would never forget. The silence after stones had spoken louder than the stones themselves. The sun dipped low, painting the sand in shades of fire, and still the circle remained heavy with silence. The human lay broken but alive, a ruin of flesh that refused to surrender its breath. The woman stayed at his side, refusing to let him be carried off as a corpse when his chest still rose with stubborn rhythm. She wiped blood from his face with shaking hands, whispering words only he could hear, though she knew he drifted far beyond them. The crowd, once hungry for death, lingered in unease. None dared lift another stone. What had begun as justice had turned into revelation. They had watched cruelty fail against willpower, tradition break upon a single man's refusal to yield. They feared to admit it aloud, yet the truth had already taken root. Their law had been undone, not by rebellion, but by sacrifice. Elders retreated to hushed corners, their voices sharp with panic. They debated whether to erase the memory, to silence all who spoke of it, to kill both and bury the evidence. But each knew the act had already spread beyond their reach. Children had seen it, mothers had seen it, warriors had seen it. The memory could not be destroyed. It would outlive them, carried in whispers stronger than decrees. The woman rose, her face streaked with dust and blood. She demanded passage to carry him to shelter, her voice trembling yet unyielding. At first, no one moved. Then, one by one, warriors lowered their heads and stepped aside. None offered help, but none barred her path. Tradition had lost its grip, and though no one spoke it, they all felt it. She lifted him as best she could, his weight dragging against her small frame, every step a battle. Yet she carried him because he had carried her. In the days that followed, the village struggled to resume its rhythm. Merchants reopened stalls, Elders tried to assert their authority, but the air had shifted. Where once the law had been unquestionable, now it was haunted by doubt. Children whispered the story to each other in secret corners, retelling it with awe. Some mocked it, but their laughter rang hollow. The image of the human bleeding under the storm lingered, gnawing at every heart. The human survived, though scars mapped his body in jagged lines. His bones healed crooked, his strength never fully returned, but life clung to him with the same stubbornness he had shown in the circle. The woman tended him daily, refusing to let him slip into the shadows. She bound his wounds, cooled his fever, fed him with her own hands. Where once she had been condemned, now she became his voice, reminding others what he had done when none of them had dared. He never spoke of the circle. When asked why he had done it, he only said that if strength existed only to harm, then it was no strength at all. The words spread quietly, repeated by those who needed them, scorned by those who feared them. Yet each repetition chipped away at the old certainty. The elders tried to dismiss the act as madness, claiming the outsider had been reckless, his endurance meaningless. But they could not erase the sight of him standing through every blow, nor the silence that had swallowed the crowd when cruelty failed to break him. Their authority remained intact in appearance, yet beneath the surface cracks widened. The law had been absolute until it had met one man who refused it. Now every command carried the echo of that defiance. The woman, once nameless among her people, became a symbol she had not sought. She had been chosen for death, yet lived because a stranger had given everything. Wherever she walked, eyes followed, some with resentment, some with reverence. Children asked her to retell the moment, and she did not spare them the blood or the pain. She wanted them to know the truth, that survival had been bought, not granted, and that the price was more than anyone should have to pay. Seasons turned, and the ritual of stoning grew less frequent. Elders claimed it was mercy guiding them, but the truth was simpler. No one could gather in the circle without remembering the human. Each stone raised now carried the weight of doubt. Each hand trembled with the memory of a man who had endured when no one else would. Fear of weakness had sustained tradition, but the sight of sacrifice had rewritten what strength meant. The human walked again, though each step was marked by pain. He never asked for honor, never sought worship, never demanded repayment. He lived quietly, speaking little, his presence enough to unsettle the old ways. He had not come to change a people, yet by surviving he had done what no army could. He had forced them to look at themselves and find shame. The woman stayed at his side, not as a debt, but as a vow. She became his shield in small ways, pushing back against whispers, defending him when elders tried to brand him a curse. In him she saw not only the man who had saved her, but the truth of what courage could be. Together, scarred and quiet, they became the living memory of the day stones failed. Among the young, a new question grew. If law demanded cruelty, was law still sacred? If strength was only measured by domination, was it truly strength? These questions were spoken in secret at first, then in gatherings, until even warriors began to falter when ordered to enforce the old ways. The human had shown them a path none had considered, that honor was not found in breaking others, but in refusing to let others be broken. He never claimed to be a savior. He never claimed to be more than a man. But in being only a man, he became more than law, more than tradition, more than fear. His endurance was not just survival, it was proof. Proof that cruelty could be defied. Proof that compassion was stronger than pain. Proof that even one broken body could stand taller than a world of obedience. In time, they spoke less of the ritual and more of the day it ended. They did not call it rebellion. They did not call it law. They called it simply the day the stones fell silent. And in every retelling, the image remained, a human, bloodied and unyielding, shielding another with nothing but his body, teaching an entire people that strength without mercy was hollow. And though he bore scars that never faded, though he limped and winced with every movement, the fire in his eyes never dimmed. For he knew what they now struggled to admit, that endurance was the greatest weapon of all. And on that day, against the storm of stones, endurance had been human.